But then we have our historic trails, which also run over multiple states. I actually live along the El Camino Real de los Tejas, which stretches from the Mexican border up through Louisiana. You have the Butterfield Overland Trail, which goes from Arkansas to California. And many, many others. And the stories that our historic trails tell everything from the Nez Perce flight to the Revolutionary Route, to the Selma to Montgomery, and every other story. So as we approach the 250th signing of the Declaration of Independence, our stories that on our historic trails tell every story that started before that birthday and has happened since. So national trails bring a lot of benefit to local economies. And every year the partnership puts together what's called the Gold Sheet that talks about the contributions that happen along our trails that are done by partner groups in collaboration with their federal entities. So our trails connect more than 230 major urban areas, trail towns, and gateway communities. When a national trail gets designated and gateway communities are recognized and involved with some sort of trail town program, businesses see an 80% increase. It's an opportunity to create some jobs that obviously stay in the community, American jobs for people living in American communities. So it's a great way to sort of build an economy on a localized level. Obviously, since COVID, we really, as a nation, are focusing even more on outdoor activities. 230 million people in the United States live within an hour drive of a national trail. Like I said, I actually live along one of them. We connect 70 national wildlife refuges, 80 national parks, and 120 wilderness areas, and those are only federal lands. When you're talking about state and county and city, it's even more public land that these trails connect. They interpret our most profound history. It's great opportunity for volunteerism and community building and engagement of young people. And of course, the most important thing we do is land protection. We have more than 60,000 miles of actual trail in all 50 states, 2/3 of which are protected and accessible to the public. When we are thinking about things like climate change and looking at large landscapes, this is what our trails are and what they do. And so a lot of the trail organizations that are partnered with the federal government actually help acquire land for trails and trail corridors, which adds more and more to protection. So when you think about becoming a national trail partner, some of the things that might be a bonus when you become a national trail is you do get access to funding resources. And so if you were a partner with the Park Service, there would be the Centennial Challenge funding might be available to you. We all remember, we've all are out there getting ready to promote the renewal of the Legacy Restoration Fund, which is for deferred maintenance. IRA funding went to a lot of trails. So there are a lot of opportunities to either get funding from the government through various programs or have matching funds like the Centennial Challenge and like cooperative agreements that allow private dollars that our trail partners raise to be matched to federal dollars. So it just opens a little bit the door towards some funding opportunities. But then the flip side of that is that you then have these formalized agreements over multiple years, and you have all these governing documents. And so there is a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of reporting, there's a lot of discussion that goes back and forth on how you proceed with your work. What is the partner organization going to do? Are they going to repair trail? Are they going to organize volunteers? Are they going to be a fundraising partner? There are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And the three different agencies all have a little bit different approach. And so as you go through this feasibility study, one of the things to think about is which agency would be the best manager for the type of trail that you have. And then becoming a National Trail partner really makes you part of a unique community. Like I said, there are 32 of us. It's a remarkable community that really bands together. There's a lot of collaboration. We create efficiencies by working through problems together and bringing solutions to our federal partners in Washington. We have a lot of collaborative learning. We have a workshop once a year where we all get together and talk about best practices, and then the advocacy piece. And the advocacy piece is really critical. We went to Washington in February as a group. There were more than 120 of us together, sort of, we call it Hike the Hill. So we were hiking on Washington. We met with all three agency leads. We met with congressional staffers and congressional committees. And when it came time to finally sign that budget, the trails didn't lose a dime. The trail funding lines remained intact. And that is because this community banded together and made the argument for the importance of trails. And so I talked about the gold sheet. And so one of the most important tools we have is pulling all this information together from our partners. And we take that gold sheet. And so, for example, we were able to talk on the Hill and in Washington that in 2023, all of the partners of the National Trails combined for 718,000 volunteer hours along our national trails, which is a value of $22 million. And then various partners like Appalachian, Pacific Crest, Florida Trail, Old Spanish, etc. They combined for $56 million in contributions toward projects and programs along their trails. So part of what we do at the partnership and band with the community to do is make that argument that every dollar that the federal government invests in national trails is returned to them greatly through valuable volunteer work and private contributions. So $75 million combined. The other thing I want to talk about is gateway communities and the benefits to gateway communities for being along scenic trails. The long trails, like you guys are studying right now, can't exist without healthy local communities, and that's a real critical piece. There's a lot of money locally through bonds, recreation trail grants, local community foundation grants, etc. And so if this trail becomes a national trail, you're going to want to make sure that the local communities are ready to take advantage through creating a gateway community program, through signage, through providing these resources for through hikers. Remembering that a lot of ordinances like lighting and other things impact hikers, where they can camp safely. But then it opens up these great opportunities. Through hikers in particular love to spend their money locally. They want to buy their shoes at a local mom and pop shop, not a big box. They want to eat at the local cafe, and so they're really wonderful opportunities to give local communities an identity that they can then use to get some funding coming into their towns. And Continental Divide and Florida Trail are two organizations that have been working really hard on their Gateway Community program. And so I don't want to talk about the National Trails without talking about, while it's a national trail, it's the local communities that are critical to volunteers, to support, and to creating the kind of experience that people who come to hike and walk your trail are wanting. So I think that's all I have. if we want to move to the next person, or we can, I think we'll do questions after.
Yeah, maybe we can keep the questions until later. We have 2 more speakers, and then we can ask them all the questions, maybe as a panel, or specific questions to specific speakers as well. So keep thinking about questions, maybe jot them down in the chat if you're on Zoom. And we'll move on to Jeff Kish.
Hi, everybody.
Hold on, Jeff. Sorry. You can, if you have a presentation, you can start sharing your screen, and I'll do the introduction. So Jeff Kish is the Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest Trail Association. Jeff's passion for the National Trail system has hewn over many thousands of miles on the ground, including completed through hikes of both the Pacific Northwest Trail, PNT, and Pacific Crest Trail, PCT. In 2015, he was appointed to the Department of Agriculture's Pacific Northwest National Scenic Trail Advisory Council, it's a long abbreviation, where he contributed to the development of the PNT comprehensive plan through 2023 and continues to engage on plan implementation. In addition to his work with the PNTA and the INHT, the Advisory Council, Jeff also serves on the partnership with the National Trail System Advocacy and Policy Committee and Trail Leaders Council. Jeff has previously served as a board member for the American Long Distance Hiking Association West, and Jeff has served as Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest Trail Association since 2016. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Is everybody seeing my screen okay?
Yep. Yes.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so I've been with the Pacific Northwest Trail Association since 2016. In that time, I've got to experience a lot of what happens, well, what's supposed to happen immediately after a National Scenic Trail is designated. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization, but then I'm really going to talk about, what you can expect from a feasibility study onward. So you already heard all about me. The one thing I would add is just, these trails are, for me, I've had a lot of professional roles in national trails, but it really just started with a life-changing experience. And for me, back in 2012, I had all of those things that you're supposed to have to be happy. I owned a house, and I owned a successful business, and I was married, and I was miserable. And I decided to sell everything that I had until I had nothing more than just a backpack. And I was living in Portland, Oregon at that time. And I hitchhiked to the Mexican border, and then I walked to Canada. And that's where I really fell in love with the national trails because of that hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. And at that point, my life was changed. So everything else that's happened since then, every day that's gone by has been about national trails for me. And there's a whole huge network of people out there that have similar stories that will spend a lifetime, a professional lifetime or a recreational lifetime with the national trails. That passion is really, really important. I think, as you'll see through the rest of the presentation, to create national trails and to continue to advocate for them. So I'm with the Pacific Northwest Trail Association. We were founded in 1977 with the idea of getting the Pacific Northwest Trail designated as a National Scenic Trail. Today, we are the designated nonprofit partner in the management of the Pacific Northwest Trail. The administering agency that we work with is the Forest Service. We really are involved in every aspect of the management of the trail. But these 4 boxes here, I think, pretty much summarize most of what we do. For construction and maintenance, we run a Conservation Corps program where we hire between 50 and 60 youth and young adults from trailside communities every year. We pay them a living wage. We provide all of their food for the summer. We provide all transportation to job sites. We have a gear library, so regardless of your resources at home, you're prepared to thrive in our programs. This is a really important part of our work. Because of this program, we can demonstrate a lot of value to the communities. As Courtney mentioned, having community buy-in and making the community appreciate the value of your trail can really go a long way in its management. for communities to see their young people have a well-paying job, to develop strong ties to the public land that's in their backyard, and potentially have long-term careers that start in the work that we do, really creates a lot of buy-in, and that's important. We also facilitate a lot of volunteer work on the trail. That's very important for the work that we need to get done, and it also helps us match federal and state grants that we have to perform the work that we do. We also do a lot of advocacy and planning. That is a picture of me addressing a Senate subcommittee at Hike the Hill, I think 2 years ago. Advocating for trails is a full-time job, and just even when you get your trail designated, it's an ongoing process, making sure that Congress understands the needs of your trail, and making sure that your agency partners understand the needs of your trail, and being a squeaky wheel. So when these decisions are being made about funding and policy and law, people are thinking about you. Planning, something I've been engaged in extensively over the years, specifically because we are a more recently designated trail and just wrapped up our comprehensive plan. That meant many, many years of planning, and that's very important too, because these plans sometimes last for decades, and land managers will be referencing them every day to make decisions about your trail. So what's in your plan matters. So it was a process that I got to spend a lot of time working on. Trail information. We provide maps that are annually updated so people can enjoy the trail safely and responsibly. We work on apps for navigation. We also do education and interpretation, which is telling all the stories of your trail, the history of the trail, the landscape that encompasses it, the communities and the peoples that have existed in that corridor for thousands of years till today. That's a big part too, and it helps create public connections with your resource. That's our trail. It's over 1,200 miles. It starts at the Continental Divide and works its way west, all the way to the westernmost point of the lower 48 states. So most through hikers start on the Continental Divide in Montana, and they spend their whole summer walking west until you literally can't walk west any further, and then you celebrate with your toes in the sand. So that's a little bit about us. Now I'm just going to talk about what my experience has been with the designation process and what comes after. Feasibility studies are usually one of the first steps. So you have the concept of a trail. Maybe it's been proven to a certain extent on the ground. You've built up a lot of local support for the trail. You've successfully advocated in Congress to have a trail studied. And then you do this feasibility study to make sure that that trail meets all the standards that it would need to meet in order to become designated. So what I would say is that with feasibility studies, it's a very important and valuable tool to make sure that this trail makes sense. But it's not the end all be all, and how the study is done is really important. So the value of the feasibility study is proportionate to its quality. Is the study really studying the right thing? Is it the right time to get the necessary buy-in? How are the agencies feeling about managing another trail? These are really important things that are going to partially determine the outcome of the process. What we've seen as a favorable feasibility study does not guarantee that a trail will be designated, but it's very, very helpful. And an unfavorable feasibility study outcome does not prohibit a trail from being designated, but it is a major hurdle to get over if that was the case. Ultimately, where there's a will, there's a way. If your trail has enough support and you can get enough support in Congress for it to be designated, regardless of the feasibility study, you could still have a designated trail. So this is a picture of the feasibility study cover that was done for the PNT. And the PNT is an example of a feasibility study that recommended no trail. And yet we still ended up getting one. So the study, when it was conducted, it determined that we had all of the qualities necessary for a National Scenic Trail. But ultimately, it recommended a no-trail alternative. And this was because the study decided that the costs, both financial and environmental, of building the trail would be too high for the benefit that the trail would provide. And of course, we didn't feel like that was true. So how did it go so wrong? The feasibility study definitely lacked the necessary specificity. It wasn't studying the right thing. When this study was done, our trail had already been hiked end to end by its first through hikers. We had a specific route and was mostly cobbled together from pre-existing infrastructure. But when the feasibility study was conducted, it did not study a specific route. It instead looked at a 6-mile wide corridor. Because of that, there's a lot of room for, I think, some bias and some assumptions. And the ultimate outcome of the study was that I think it assumed the worst, that an entirely new trail would have to be built through this corridor, which would be very expensive and have significant environmental impacts. 29 years later, our trail was designated as a National Scenic Trail. And the reason why that happened was we were able to look at the feasibility study and answer all the questions about the negative interpretation, I think, in that study about whether or not our trail should be designated. We were able to show that most of the route already existed. We were able to show that in the places where there were the strongest environmental concerns, those were places where the trail already existed and no additional impacts were expected. We were able to show a large community of support and a robust organization that could act as the agency partner in the trail's management. And we were able to show that in the places where the trail was not complete, it would actually be a net benefit for conservation, because we'd be talking about bringing a lot of land into public ownership and increasing the protections and creating connections between sections of intact habitat. So this would be a net benefit not only for the recreation experience, but for conservation as well. So what are the benefits of National Scenic Trail designation? I've got Freddie Mercury here singing about fame and fortune and everything that goes with it. New sources of funding, recognition, technical assistance, protections. The truth is, it depends. National Scenic Trail designation is not a guarantee for almost any of these things, but it does offer a lot of opportunity. And the rest is really up to an organization that is the managing partner for that trail, how much support they can build in communities, in the state, in Congress, to take advantage of those opportunities, to make sure that you get your slice of the pie. Overall, I think it's a net benefit, but designation isn't where it stops, it's where it starts. It's still a lot of work to really take advantage of all the opportunities that come with designation. How does the trail corridor develop after it's designated? The first thing is a comprehensive plan. In the National Trail System Act, it says that within 2 complete fiscal years of the trail's designation, unless the designating legislation for your trail specifies otherwise, a comprehensive plan must be produced by the administering agency and presented to Congress. In the case of the Pacific Northwest Trail, this plan would have been due in 2011, and the Forest Service just wrapped it up this December. So we were very, very, very late, but we got it done. To make one of these plans, the administering agency is required to work with a Federal Advisory Committee Act committee. So in our case, that was the Pacific Northwest National Scenic Trail Advisory Committee. That was a process that I started with in 2015 and continue to be on the committee outside of my work with PNTA to provide recommendations to the agency for the management of the trail. And those recommendations became part of this plan. After your comprehensive plan is done, you should have a lot of guidance in that plan for the optimal location of your trail. In our case, it didn't include the entire optimal location review manual. It just had a lot of guidelines that would later be incorporated into a manual, and that's something that we're working on right now. The importance of this process is all National Scenic Trails, when they're designated, do not meet the standards necessary for them to be National Scenic Trails. It is recognized that this is a process where designation starts the process towards the trail's completion. Optimal location review takes all of the information from your comprehensive plan about the desired conditions for your trail, the nature and purposes of your trail, and it helps you come up with a process to identify all of the places where the trail does not meet the standards that are required for a national trail, and helps you identify where you need to move the trail in order to meet those desired conditions, to make sure the trail is completely connected from end to end, to make sure that it's permanently protected and publicly accessible. And one thing that happens with National Scenic Trails is usually when they're designated, they're largely on motorized tread in order to maintain connectivity. National Scenic Trails are non-motorized. So what that means is you don't designate the trail and kick off all the motorized use. You begin a process to slowly relocate sections of the trail onto non-motorized tread to meet those standards that are set in the National Trail System Act. What we've seen with optimal location and trail completion is examples like the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, which took many decades to complete. And a lot of people will say a trail's never complete. You're always working on making it better. So this is a long process. It's not something that happens right away. Once you have optimal location review, you can start with land acquisition and protection. This is a map that we have that shows land ownership within the trail corridor. And you can see there's a lot that's already on Forest Service land, which is our administering agency. It's also Park Service land, state land. A lot of it is public. There's also private. So we're working with the Trust for Public Land and the Forest Service right now to develop the inventory of assets that need to be acquired to permanently protect our trail. And National Trail designation, one of the benefits is you'll rank really well with Land and Water Conservation Fund and other programs that are out there to secure land and bring it into public ownership. So that's something we're really, really excited about because we do have gaps and we need to close them. Challenges in National Scenic Trail designation. I think Courtney hit on this pretty well. There's a lot of benefits, but when you have this official designation, there's also a lot more hoops that you have to jump through, I think. There's added management complexity. There's more rules you have to follow. There's mandatory processes you have to undergo. You hand over some control because you have an administering agency, and now this is a national resource. And delays. Like I mentioned, our comprehensive plan was supposed to take 2 years, and it took 13, 14 years to complete. And that's because you're working with government agencies and things don't always work as fast as you want them to. So this is my last slide, and I just put it on here. This is in the center with a hat holding onto the sign is Ron Strickland. He was the person who came up with the original idea for our trail in 1970. The people on the right side of the screen are Janet and Rex. They were the first 2 people to through hike our trail in 1977. And these are all founding board members of our organization. So the idea for the trail was in 1970. Our trail was first hiked in 1977. Our organization was founded in 1977. Our trail was not designated until 2009. And the process to begin implementing our comprehensive plan has just begun. These things take a lot of time, but if you have a lot of passion and you really care about seeing this thing through and you build the necessary support, it can get done. So that's it.
Thank you, Jeff. So again, we will wait with questions until the end of this session. Until the last speaker for them, who is, I'm going to introduce him in a second. And the last speaker here is Kevin Keeler. Many of you know him. He is a Iditarod National Historic Trail administrator and the federal administrator for the INHT for 20 years, and has worked with on public lands and trails in Alaska for 37 years. He first became involved with the Iditarod National Historic Trail in the early 1990s when he led a community-based feasibility study on the development of the Iditarod National Historic Trail in Girdwood, Alaska. In 2004, it became BLM's only national trails administrator in the country, later working on partnership projects to develop new public shelter cabins, design and install way marking signs along the trail, and provide grant support to BLM's trail partner, the Iditarod National Trail Alliance. And in the past 8 years, he has worked numerous type 1, 2, and 3 wildland fires as a resource advisor throughout the Western US and Alaska, attempting to minimize or repair the effects of fire suppression on natural and cultural resources. He has served on an Anchorage Historic Preservation Commission, on the Chugach State Park Citizens Advisory Board, and is on the board of directors of the Anchorage Ski Club, which operates Arctic Valley Ski Area. Busy person. All right, and I will start this presentation in just a second.
I don't need to use the microphone.
You might.
Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yep, good, thank you. It's lifting there. I think I recognized my backpack in that last slide, my first backpack. I thought, how many people have a backpack like that? Those healthy frame packs. Never killed me.
Mike, are we good there also?
I can see the notes, but I can also see the book.
You can see that.
I can see the.
I don't care if they can see my notes.
Not a huge,
What's that?
not a huge deal if you can see the notes on there, but.
From just a second again. Nope. Yeah.
The notes on that page.
Oh, gosh. Oh. Try again.
I think it's that little, under display settings, that
Display
little
settings.
triangle, I think you can tell it,
I don't see the display settings on my screen. Well, you okay with that?
I'd rather show the pictures.
Okay.
If the audience
Yeah.
could just, they can follow me notes. Yeah, it's a swap screen. I think.
Yeah, but I don't see it anymore. It's not in here.
go share screen. All the functions of and functions now. Yeah, that's one of those. Yeah. So one more try and we'll
I
just
think you have
go
to
over.
put power.
This is the, yeah. This one. Nope.
I think you have to swap screen.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, I know, I don't see what.
That's it, actually.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd rather have them see these folks see the pictures here. That's why I brought an analog version of the notes. Yeah, we can do it that way if people can see the picture. Well, so can I be travel? There we go. There we go with that.
Okay.
It's the most stressful thing in the world, is trying to do this stuff. Anyway, my name is Kevin Keeler. I'm the administrator for the Iditarod National Historic Trail, and I'm going to try to provide some Alaska perspective to national trails in Alaska and our own Alaskan circumstances up here. Been at this stuff since 1984. Want to share some thoughts and observations that I've had, perhaps related to challenges with trail planning and trail development. This picture, by the way, is 2 weeks ago on the Iditarod Trail north of Unalakleet, heading towards Shaktoolik. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. So, see my notes here. All right. Just trying to shrink this meeting thing right here. Is there a way to shrink this? It's right in the middle of my notes. Yay, okay, perfect. Anyway, the Iditarod Trail feasibility study, if you will, was done as a result of congressional directive with the first iteration of the National Trail System Act. In 1968, Congress directed the development of a feasibility study of one of 14 gold rush trails in Alaska as potential national scenic trails. The term feasibility study wasn't used at that time. And an agency that was in the Department of Interior at that time, that does not exist anymore, the Bureau of Outdoor Recreation, started up the report in September of '73 and completed it in '77. And they looked at Section 5B of the National Trail System Act. It's something still being used to evaluate national trails today, about their feasibility. And the BOR report recommended only one trail for designation in the National Trail System, the Iditarod Trail, or Seward to Nome Trail, and an amendment to the National Trail System Act that would create a whole new category of trails called National Historic Trails. They didn't really exist until 1978. So I'm going to run through a couple differences between National Scenic and National Historic Trails that we've run into and inform kind of where I'm going with this discussion here. Both of them are congressionally designated, and they're expected to really be the cream of the crop, have outstanding national significance. There's also different kinds of trails in the National Trail System Act. There are national recreation trails. We have them here in Alaska. They can be designated by the Secretaries of Interior or Agriculture. Tony Knowles Coastal Trail is a national recreation trail. The Campbell Airfield Loop Trail System on BLM lands where I work is also a national recreation trail. Connecting and side trails for national trails are also secretarially designated. So they're a tool in the toolbox, but a little bit different in that the National Scenic and Historic Trails are a congressional designation. The National Scenic Trails are expected to be feasible from point A to point B. They're expected to be continuous. They have continuity feasibility, and that's one of the critical criteria for designation that they have. National Historic Trails need not be continuous on site. They're fragments, really, sites and segments that are of outstanding national significance in our history. Although that isn't the case in the Iditarod, because you can still pretty much follow public lands all the way from Seward to Nome. And the old route is still the main overland route between rural Alaska villages. when you think about it in terms of trail planning, National Historic Trails are in a sense backwards facing. The lines and points that make up National Historic Trails are already on the ground. There are control points, we've got them already, that become our trail alignments. The Iditarod National Historic Trail was easily approved and designated as a National Historic Trail because it was a working trail to begin with. The Alaska Roads Commission developed it, followed it based on the pioneering work of various, basically trail breakers who went out there and pushed the trail through both from Nome and from this side of the Alaska Range. What made it a good trail 100 years ago makes it a good trail today. And that's a little different than some of the other national historic trails that are out there, like the Civil Rights Trail, Trail of Tears, the Nimi Poo, Nez Perce Trail. Those trails really are overshadowed by much bigger social movements that triggered the use of those trails and really weren't designed as trails per se. The old Iditarod Trail has outstanding historic features that make it basically qualifying for the National Trails Act. It represents America's last great gold rush, which took place over snow. It used over snow technology that relied on dogs, something very different than many of the National Historic Trails in the lower 48, which basically relied on horses or stock like oxen and that sort of thing. You think about the Pony Express Trail, well, it's all about horses down there on that one. So I'm going to mention some insights that I developed when I was asked to consider questions about this presentation. And I thought a lot about, along with connectivity, what is it that makes national trails nationally significant? And really, it's in the title pretty much, to give it away. The whole concept of protecting and enjoying scenery for national trails came from the America the Beautiful movement in the 1960s. First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson, she played a really huge role in inspiring the beautification campaign across the country. And national attention to trails was first established, or I should say addressed in 1966, Trails for America report mandated by President Johnson. Based on that report, the National Trail System Act was passed in 1968, and we had the first National Scenic Trails established at that time. So it struck me that National Scenic Trails revolve around the concept of scenery themes that make it outstanding on a national scale. You look at ones like the, let's see how this works, the Appalachian Trail. It follows the Appalachian crest pretty much from Georgia all the way to Maine. The Pacific Crest Trail follows the crest of trails all the way along the Pacific from Mexico to Canada. The Continental Divide Trail, it's on the divide that basically is between the watersheds that are so critical today in our country. INHT Trail, that's the extent of the glaciers in Wisconsin. North Country Trail, we heard from Jeff earlier about the Pacific Northwest Trail following the divide, basically from Montana to the Pacific Ocean. So this whole concept of scenery is extremely important, and one that I think that we have an opportunity to capture here in Alaska in this whole trail planning effort. And so I started to think about this. What is our most scenic feature here that has significant national and international recognition? So what geographic feature is really popular with Alaskans and visitors? What feature could become the positive control point for the trail along the way to really help lay out the trail, figure out where the optimum location is for the trail itself? What feature could encourage cooperation and engagement of reluctant stakeholders, because there is a lot of reluctance out there from a number of different parties? And what feature could become the main theme for interpretation and marketing? It's pretty obvious, but we're Alaskans, and so we kind of get dulled to the amazing scenery and places we live here in Alaska. It's an everyday feature, and it's easy to forget what it is itself. So in my opinion, the most salient geographic feature between Anchorage and Fairbanks that the Long Trail can provide views of is Denali Peak itself. So I want to scroll down and see what the heck I wrote here, because it's not big enough. But I think something like a Denali View Trail could be a main organizing positive control point for this trail itself. It would be hard to deny its national scenic significance if it was something like a Denali View Trail. This would provide basically a reason for being on the trail itself, and in terms of locating it, getting it onto the ground, it could become one of those important features to be taken into the alignment. But let's set this thought aside, because I'm still going to go on other thoughts I've had to and wanted to throw out here. And Jeff mentioned the feasibility process itself. And I want to say the government mandated feasibility process isn't really an ideal process for trail planning. It's not that iterative. It doesn't keep up with the thoughts and thinking and evolution that people have had. Basically, this whole trail process is kind of at the point of identifying the corridor up there, which is the middle box. But it becomes frozen in time in a way. There's going to need to be more studies that are done. And as you heard from Jeff earlier, it took them a long time to get the process done. This process we actually used as we were laying out the Iditarod Trail in the Girdwood Valley itself, which shows its applicability. It's a really nice process that we borrowed from the Bay Area Ridge Trail Council, which is building a 400-mile loop trail system around San Francisco Bay. Anyway, after the completion of a feasibility study and congressional designation, and Jeff mentioned, it's not necessarily a done deal, comes a comprehensive management planning process. This includes the federal administrator, relevant stakeholders, and for the National Historic Trail and this National Historic Trail, it was really a concept plan. It wasn't an allocated land use plan. There's more step-down planning that needs to occur after that time. It's really up to the trail managers and advocates to determine the timing for that important step. So Alaska Trails asked me to identify things that worked in the history of the administration of the Iditarod National Historic Trail. And one of the biggest points I want to make is that when the state of Alaska was engaged in the planning and management process for the Iditarod National Historic Trail, great things were achieved. In the 46 years that the National Historic Trail, Iditarod, was existed, there are two major phases when the state of Alaska was involved. Both resulted in significant benefits for the trail. First phase was in the early 1980s, especially between 1981 and 83. BLM and the state of Alaska owned and operated a joint federal state Iditarod Trail Office that was comprised of BLM and Alaska's Division of Parks, Department of Natural Resources. This resource inventory was completed along with a detailed map atlas of the trail itself. Right-of-ways were established for the trail through the Matsu Valley out of Kinnick itself, and the comprehensive management plan, which had basically stalled at that time, was retooled and then finally adopted. But if you look at the proposed long trail corridor, you know that there's a lot of ownership that's non-federal, which is just like the Iditarod National Historic Trail. In this image here, it basically shows that the state of Alaska owns 60% of the lands, while 20% is owned by the federal government and another 20% by native corporations. And that's mostly overlain by existing easements, which is a whole other story. Anyway, on to other phases. The second phase where the state was really involved was the state Iditarod easement project. It was staffed and operated between 2007 and 2015. And during that time, 1,800 miles of state right-of-ways were issued or confirmed for the contemporary Iditarod Trail. And these were really prerequisite before you can do anything on the trail. You can't basically improve your trail until you have your right-of-way. It's just part of the typical delivery system of trails. We were able to build 7 new shelter cabins along the trail. We were able to install a whole bunch of waymarking sign along the trail. And all these had to happen because the major landowner needed to legalize his actions in advance. And when the state did that, they established the right-of-way or the easement, and they said all these activities could be done within that corridor itself. Safety cabins could be built, waymarking signs, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really a critical piece. And really the way that we delivered the improvements to the trail without having very little ownership. We've only got 100 miles of BLM ownership of the main trail itself. It's because we had the involvement of a critical statewide partner. Jeff mentioned that he works for that organization for the Pacific Northwest Trail. In Alaska, it's the Iditarod National Historic Trail Alliance. It was chartered out of a federal advisory council in 1999 between members of that group and the BLM, and it works beyond the boundaries to implement the comprehensive management plan. So if we take the Centennial Safety Cabin project that I mentioned there, BLM was instrumental in that. They provided, I'm sorry, the Alliance was instrumental in that. They provided pass-through funding to Alaska Department of Natural Resources Iditarod easement project. They hired a youth restoration corps to do the cabin construction. And basically shown what we know all along, that nonprofits can be a lot more nimble than government. They also do lots of educational and outreach interpretation that's going on, and they're really a critical component for national trails themselves. And I also want to say too, this is just some shameless advertising for them. They're looking for a project coordinator right now. So if you know somebody who wants to be a project coordinator for the Iditarod Historic Trail Alliance and tell stories of stewardship and history of trails in Alaska, check them out at this email address or talk to me afterwards. So I want to get back to the importance of having public agencies who are authorized or mandated to manage these linear units. On the federal level, the National Trail System Act envisioned this need, and they identified the main land management agencies to be the federal protection component, BLM, Forest Service, Park Service, and one agency to herd the cats, the trail administrator themselves. On the state level, the lands that the proposed long trail would cross really need that sort of thing. But currently they're managed by the state land manager that really doesn't have a recreation use mandate. This is the Alaska Department of Natural Resources Division, Mining, Land and Water. It's a multiple use agency, a lot like BLM. And they have a lot of other things on their plate due to their statutory mandate. And all those lands are managed under Alaska Statute 38, which I think is a marginal place to put it. So where I'm going with this is that, or the other part of it is that when administrations change, priorities are subject to change based on the agenda of the governor. So in 2015, the Iditarod easement project, even though there's another 400 miles trail that still need right-of-way adjudication on them, it was disbanded by the current administration at that time. So basically, these things happen, and there's been little involvement by the state of Alaska for the past 9 years in pursuing the objectives of the comprehensive management plan. So really what I'm getting at is that there are a bunch of institutional limitations for using Alaska Statute 42. But we have a statute that actually is aimed at recreation. And I think there are, it provides us a way forward. I also want to point out that these are my personal opinions, not BLM's or the Department of Interior. So take this as my perspective for 35 years plus up here in the state of Alaska. I think that it could be advantageous to designate both the Iditarod National Historic Trail, because I want to get under this umbrella and on this bandwagon, and the Long Trail on state lands as a linear unit of the Alaska State Park System, managed by Alaska State Parks Division of Outdoor Recreation under Title 41. There are examples of this in the lower 48. The Katy Trail State Park in Missouri is managed by Katy State Park System. It's 260-mile long rail trail. And we have one here in Alaska, which is one of our most cherished ones. It's the Kenai River Special Management Area, which is the linear conservation system unit managed under Alaska Title 41. So anyway, to recap some of these suggestions, I think that we need to, or I suggest and recommend looking for a unifying scenic and geographic theme for the trail, perhaps a Denali View Trail theme. It's important to have the involvement of these peer agencies that are both on the state and federal level, and the importance of building the capacity of nonprofit partners. And then finally, I think that the Long Trail would profit for management under Alaska Statute 41 as it's suited better, meeting the needs of linear recreation resources. So So that's it for my presentation here, and kick it back over to everybody else.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Courtney and Jeff. So we have about maybe 10 minutes, 7 minutes for questions. Any questions in the audience for the speakers? Richard?
A lot of, with actually longer trails together, how are we going to give some consistency in the regulations so the hikers know what they can and cannot do? I'm thinking primarily about, fire and water, and does it all depend on whose land you're on, as to what the rules are, and how are you going to know what the rules are?
So I don't know if you heard on Zoom, but the question was, how can we make consistent policy along different
Segment.
segments the different land management, specifically for fire regulations?
Yeah, do you have to build a cabin and put a stove inside, or can people just
Yeah,
have a fire?
so is it going to be under different up to different land management policy, or can it be a continuous regulation along the whole route? So that's the question. If anybody would like to.
Well,
I can take a stab at that one.
Oh,
He's
okay,
got
go
the
ahead.
National Trail.
Right.
so
Yeah.
National Scenic
Jeff,
Trail.
go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, your comprehensive plan provides an overarching direction for the trail, but it does not compel individual land managers along the length of the trail to follow it if they're not federal partners. So in our case, we have overarching guidance in our comprehensive plan that applies to all Forest Service land, and then we have arrangements with the National Park Service and BLM to try to provide some sort of consistency. But in the case of, a state land manager, they can choose to follow that direction or not. And when it comes to how the hikers, what regulations they have to follow along the length of our trail, it really is unit by unit direction that we're trying to bring consistency to right now. So when it comes to things like, fires, every single unit, even within one agency, we have 7 national forests. They have different policies at different times about fire. Food storage is another one. We have to, as an organization, provide a printable sheet on our website so the users can understand when they cross agency lines, what is the new expectation. Ideally, you do want consistency, but until you have, things like forest plan revision to formally adopt direction from your comprehensive plan, or agreements between the agencies for consistent management, it can be inconsistent.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Question?
No, it's a comment,
Okay.
aiming toward this. And beyond needing to have a stick, hopefully there's a carrot out there too. For instance, the Leave No Trace Foundation communicates and has established the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. And basically using the lands in a manner that perpetuates its being around in the future for other people is hopefully something that we communicate through stewardship, and that those messages pretty much become unified and are picked up by various different management agencies. So hopefully there's an appeal toward people's higher self and to act toward these Leave No Trace principles or other principles that help steward the resource itself in the future.
Thanks, Kevin. So Beth, I saw you have a hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering how the other trails deal with connection to the urban places along the system, and whether they have gateway community connectors, spurs, or whether they call it a braid, or and then how, maybe some of those are paved. So I want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Jeff?
I can let Jeff answer a little bit, but I'll tell you that the development of the Gateway Community System and Network is a really piece of the puzzle. We had our workshop in Florida this year, and we got to go see some of the work that they're doing in the gateway communities. They have a special logo that goes out to businesses in the gateway communities that are along the trail system. They do a lot of advertising, and they are part of, these gateway communities are also part of that messaging you were asking about regulations in the area and fire and what you can and can't do and where can you go to the bathroom and, you know, all those sorts of things. Those are really a lot of times taken on and by gateway communities, and gateway communities are an incredibly crucial piece. In the one that we were at in Florida, they had this massive billboard next to a lake that was all about the Florida Trail. It showed you the map of where you were on the trail, what the two connecting side trails were, where you were in relation to other public land. And then there was a bulletin board for like special warnings, you know, for weather or things like that, or like fire bans, all sorts of stuff. So they placed these billboards all along the trail. So when you're doing a through hike of the Florida Trail, you see this similar signage everywhere you go. So you know when you get there, you can look for all the things you need, updated information, alerts, anything that you might need to know, bear activity if you're, you know, in a different part of the country from Florida, but Florida would be more, you know, animal activity that you need to be aware of. So those gateway communities are actually super critical in a lot of not just interpretation, but also information given to visitors. And Jeff, do you want to say more about what you guys do?
Yeah, I think Courtney covered a lot of that relationship and the value, the importance of trailside communities in the management and the place they play in the trail itself. I would just speak a little bit more to the actual physical connection, and a lot of that comes down to what the nature and the purposes of your trail are. In our case, it was determined since the very beginning that our trail would be as much as possible a wilderness trail that really kind of skewed towards the most wild and the most remote side of the recreation opportunity. So when our trail was designated, it did go right through some towns, and that's just because we used pre-existing infrastructure. But we know that the nature and purposes of our trail and the desired conditions for our trail probably mean that those places need to be relocated to more wild places. What that means for those communities, there's concern that they're going to lose the PNT if we put the PNT in the right place. But I think what's important is the trail can bring the most value to local the intended experience. So in those places where we're moving away the trail out of a community, we actually make the trail better and probably bring more users to it. Then what we want to do is make sure that community is still a trail town. And the fact is, long distance users will always go into town to get a burger and get a beer, stay at a hotel, wash their laundry, do their mail, all that kind of stuff. But how do we get them back and forth and really make the community feel connected? And that can be done with access trails. And actually, in the National Trail System Act, there is a classification of trails that doesn't get talked about a lot, side and connecting trails. It's part of the National Trail System. So we envision things like a trail that goes right from the heart of the community with an archway that says, welcome to your adventure on the Pacific Northwest Trail. And there's a nice interpretive kiosk. The community sees themselves as part of the trail. It gives the hikers a safe way in and out. You maintain that connection, but you still keep the trail as good as it can be.
Thank you, thank you. And Will?
Yeah, well, Jeff mentioned in the trail's nature and purposes, I know that's a really important concept for management of a trail, and I'm just curious if anyone can speak to who is defining the nature and purpose of any given trail between Congress, the agency administrators, the nonprofit partners. So yeah, who's defining that, and then when in the process is that typically landed upon? Is that prior to designation, after designation? Yeah.
Did you guys hear the question?
Yeah, I don't want to hog up all the time here, but I could answer that one. So in our case, nature and purposes was developed during the development of our comprehensive plan. Most of what you see in guidance from the National Trail System Act says that, you know, indicates that one of the most important things is nature and purposes, and almost everything else in your comprehensive plan will tier off of that. to support your nature and purposes. Because we had to have an advisory council to help inform the comprehensive management plan development, that was a subcommittee of the advisory council that spent a lot of time trying to design that statement. But we really looked to the history of our trail and what was provided in testimony to Congress in the lead up to designation. So we weren't deciding ourselves what we thought the nature and purposes of this designated trail should be. We tried to understand what Congress understood when they designated and what the founders of the trail wanted, incorporate that into it. And so the advisory council contributed a lot. Us as the partner organization contributed a lot. And that was further modified through the public process. So the comprehensive plan was developed through NEPA, and NEPA includes public comment and objections, and we had additional feedback come in that way before the nature and purposes was finalized.
I have a very quick question. I think can we have 2 more minutes? Okay. So you, Jeff and Courtney, you mentioned that, and actually Kevin too, that first, after the feasibility study, there needs to be a comprehensive management plan in place. And in the case of the Pacific Northwest Trail, it took 13 years. So in the meantime, how is the route decided on? Is the route suggestion included in the feasibility plan, as feasibility study? And how do you put markers on the trail that hasn't gone through the comprehensive management plan? So how do you decide what the route is before the plan is established?
In our case, the specific route of the trail did not exist in the feasibility study. Like I said in my presentation, they just looked at the corridor. But the truth was we already had a specific route, and when the trail was designated in the designating legislation, there was a map. It was not a good map. It was an 8.5 by 11, and the trail was drawn on with a Sharpie. So after the trail was designated, then the agency worked with our organization, who actually knew where the trail was on the ground, to formalize that and enter it into their system. But in the absence of a comprehensive plan, this goes back to that bureaucracy slide that I had. We wanted to get to work right away in relocating sections that we knew needed to be relocated. And we put a lot of work into early optimal location review and all of that. And sooner or later, because we were designated, whereas in the past, we would just go to a local land manager and say, hey, can we build this? And they would say, yeah, that makes sense. And we'd do the necessary environmental study and build it. What started to happen was people said, well, you can't move the trail until you know what the optimal location review process will say for that. And you can't have an optimal location review process officially until you have desired conditions and a formalized nature and purposes. So you can't do any of that work until your comp plan is done. And that put us, a decade behind or more in doing the work that we really needed to do to complete our trail, because we had to wait that long for our comprehensive plan. The answer is, in the interim, sometimes you could just wait. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, thank you, all the presenters, and maybe give another round of applause to. Again, I just wanted to mention that there's ongoing feasibility study for the National Scenic Trail designation for the Alaska Lone Trail. You can find more information about it on our website, on the Alaska Trails website, and the Lone Trail page. And also there is a flyer on the back on the table with a QR code to their website, to the BLM's website, if you're interested in providing your public input on the route. The public comment is open again through April 19th, just another week, and then again for a couple of weeks in June. So yeah, thank you everyone, and guess 10-minute break.